Hello everyone and welcome to another Bible study and episode review in Shady Oak Ministries. I'm of course Shady Oak and today we'll be going over episode 9 of season 3 of the TV show My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. The episode Spike at Your Service. And to discuss today's topic, it's definitely one that's very popular in the apologetics group and in the topic of historical context, and not only noting that God's law was not really anything that anyone could argue against in a time that condoned the term quote-unquote slavery. I'd like to read to you guys the book of the Bible in the law pertaining to the Levites, the book of Leviticus, which is what that means, pertaining to the Levites, speaking to the priesthood, those who would be running the government and deciding between the people what was fair and unfair, how treatment should be distributed between the people, and how to basically run a nation is what the book of the Levites was about. And not only the sacrifices, but the festivals, how things were to be done, and all of which pointing to what would one day be perfectly fulfilled in the life of Jesus Christ. And in noting God's law on slavery, I want you guys to turn to the book of Leviticus chapter 25, verses 39 through 55. And in noting that I couldn't stress this anymore to people who get very upset at the term slavery, we have created a stereotype in the most probably broad term possible that that's always going to be a bad thing. But you need to note that slavery back in that day and age was, well, actually in any day and age actually, the harsh taskmaster stereotype that a lot of people make it out to be wasn't the true case at all anymore, that we could say that every single boss-employee scenario is abusive. And just like in the statement that says, yes, being a slave means you are human property, but for all intents and purposes, let's compare that to any one of our other properties, like say our TV set. Do you guys force your TV to produce a better screen and threaten to unplug it if it does so? I mean, you could, but we naturally don't treat things well. Do you beat your television if it doesn't give you reception? Naturally, I don't think so. If any of you guys have an appliance, like say an oven, and it's meant to serve a purpose in the home, do you guys treat it cruelly? Do you deprive it of electricity and its vital resources and nutrients? Do you berate it and overuse it and abuse it? Well, you could, but the problem is that breaks things and costs you money. So we have an inherent value of recognizing that the things we own, the things that we've taken under our charge, are things we take care of. But noting first, before I get into any explanation of this, I want you to read what God said is how slavery was supposed to go down, and then you could come to your own conclusions on the matter. Leviticus 25:39. And if one of your brethren who dwells by you becomes poor and sells himself to you, you shall not compel him to serve as a slave. As a hired servant and a sojourner he shall be with you, and it shall serve you until the year of Jubilee. Now, quick note on that, it was in the previous chapter, actually previous verses, that discussed this in verses 8 through 22, where the year of Jubilee was once every 7 years, where all debts would be repaid, or basically forgiven. The land would be given a chance to rest, and all harvest would basically be taken off. Like on Sunday, we usually take the day as the weekend, but Saturday was the Sabbath, and that was a day where you were just told, don't work on that day. That's a day that's set aside for God. And noting that God needed just to use that, it's just saying, hey, take a day off, throw a frisbee, eat a hot dog, spend time with God. We all could use a vacation, but noting how slavery works. And then he shall depart from you, he and his children with him, and shall return to his own family, and shall return to the possession of his fathers, for they are my servants, whom I bought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over them with rigor, but you shall fear your God. And as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of strangers who dwell among you, and their families who are with you, which they beget in your land, and shall become your property. And you may take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them as a possession. They shall be your permanent slaves. But regarding your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule over one another with rigor. Now, if a sojourner or a stranger close to you becomes rich, and one of your brethren who dwells by him becomes poor, and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner close to you, or to a member of your stranger's family, after he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or anyone who is of near kin to him in his family may redeem him, or if he is able, he may redeem himself. Thus he shall reckon with him who bought him. The price of his release shall be according to the number of years, from the year that he was sold to him until the year of the Jubilee. It shall be according to the time of a hired servant for him. If there are still many years remaining, according to him he shall repay the price of his redemption from the money which he has bought. And if there remain but a few years until the year of Jubilee, then he shall reckon with him, and according to his years he shall repay him with the price of his redemption. He shall be with him as a yearly hired servant, and he shall not rule with rigor over him in your sight. And if he is not redeemed in these years, then he shall be released in the year of Jubilee, he and his children with him. For the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants, whom I bought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So, let me summarize that statement. And in everything that God said, this is how you're going to treat slaves in any case and scenario. The purpose of slavery was always to work off to pay a debt. If you became poor, that was always the emphasis of anyone that was a part of the nation of Israel. If you became slave to someone, it wasn't a permanent thing. It was at most a 7-year service, because the year of Jubilee was once every 7 years. Now, the purpose was always in paying off a debt. Now, the same thing is true for our employment and our jobs. We attach ourselves to a company. We literally sign a contract. We sell ourselves to this company under the conditions that by this return rate, we would provide a service, that we'd be like a hired hand and perform a purpose of the company. Now, the benefits, you would basically be a butler. You would live with, be fed by, provided for, and even allowed to marry into the family that you serve and have children while you're a slave. Now note this as well. What were the conditions? If you're a fellow Israelite, maximum service of 7 years. If you are from another nation, which God said, yes, you are able to purchase them as slaves, including children. Why was this for a lifetime? Why was this a permanent process? Well, because for all intents and purposes, the law pertaining to the Levites, this would be concerning when they'd be entering into the land of Canaan. And in that area, they would run into various groups of people that God would be setting up, Gibeonites and such, who would be, for all intents and purposes, prisoners of war. And by getting the benefits of being a hired slave and a servant for life, they would be cared for, provided for, fed, and be treated as a part of your home. No, it still head to the standard of a human being, but also be considered property, because guess what? POWs, they don't have anywhere else to go. You're conquering their land. And note this, that when they're conquering the land of Canaan, God gave them, I think it was 400 years, and with fair warning, to stop with all of these debased practices that they were making a part of their daily lives. And I don't even want to get into them because of the chances that children will be reading some of this. And in listening to these studies, recognize you can read the Bible on your own time, but note that God had good reason when these people were being taken out of their land. But if you saw that these people were of good character and were to take them a part of your home, hire them for all intents and purposes for a lifetime, you were giving them a home. You're basically just taking homeless people into your home and saying, okay, I want you to work for me, and in exchange, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to clothe you, I'm going to make sure a roof over your head, and if, with my permission, you can even marry my children. And lastly, the term of a bondslave, which was in another separate chapter, but I want to include it in this because it was a lifetime commitment to someone in service, but always on a volunteer basis. You could choose this. They'd be given an earring and a special saying when you would be nailed to the door, the post of your door, and saying in that ceremony, you have become my bondslave for life. Now, Your status as a slave. You are human property. The Bible points that out. And saying that just like we talked about before reading the verses, you are in the home to serve a purpose. Now, children in our day and age could be considered under the same regard, that when you are in the house, you have chores to tend to. You are given responsibilities. You are in the home not just to take up resources, but to provide a service. That just like the television is meant for entertainment, just like the oven is for cooking, a hired servant was, for all intents and purposes, to stay available for the needs of the people who you were working to pay off. And you don't abuse these things, you don't deprive them of resources, you don't treat them harshly unless you're some kind of psychopath. And God mentioned 3 times in this, don't treat your slaves with vigor. Don't treat your people harshly. And in noting this, that the ways to not only get yourself into these situations of owing a debt or just being in a scenario where you had a chance to make up for yourself, but thankfully because your character, you were given a second chance by these people to be a part of their home, here were the ways to redeem yourself. And I say redeem in the most literal sense of the term, because you had become devalued to restore your status as a free man. And here's the other interesting thing too, is that in our modern day and age, for those of you who use iTunes, have iPods, and you guys get gift cards, they actually use the term redeem. I'm hoping at the time of this upload that they keep that phrase because I think it's very accurate. But whatever the price that was placed on that card is then uploaded and restored. Whatever that thing was worth has now been redeemed and recognized on your computer. That the worth that was once paid for that has now been recognized and you can use it again. Now, here are the ways. There were 3. You could either have a family member, quote-unquote, bail you out of jail by paying off your debt, and the price would go up or down based off of how many more years you had to serve. If you had a longer sentence, then obviously the price would go up. But if it was close by, or if, it was just naturally a forgivable circumstance, it would go up or down based off of it. The second one was to work off your service, to just serve the number of years, and then the Year of Jubilee, or whenever you paid off your debt, if you could pay for it yourself, if you had earned enough money to pay for all your bills, naturally you could leave the job. You could move on to other things in your life. And the third was to be forgiven your debt by the one you owe it to wait till the Year of Jubilee happened, to have the government basically just say, okay, all debts wiped clean. Now, with all of this in mind, I don't think anyone would have the problem if this was the type of slavery being introduced in the United States, because when we hear slavery, we think iron and chains, force, work harder. Oh, they're drinking, their Fanta drink with a little sunglass and the lemon in it. That's not it at all. Now note, people took advantage of this, and in fact the stereotype for abusing slaves came more later in Israel's history, as well as in Roman times, where slaves are basically considered next to nothing. But note, that wasn't in the Bible. That was something that man made it out to be. And when you take God's word and twist it, that's not the standard you hold it to. That's just something you're trying to do to try and corrupt his character by using your own corrupt character to misinterpret and twist his words to what you want it to be, which doesn't make him a jerk, it makes you weird. And the same thing is true for someone who's abusing their appliances. Note this. Now, going over to John chapter 15 and verse 15, I want to naturally get Jesus' insight into all of this. And noting that when he was making a point on this matter, what was, all in all, our status concerning the debt that we owed to God? And noting that all of us, we are in debtors, naturally. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The wages of sin is death, that we would basically, by rebelling against God, we are asking ourselves to pay off a sentence that ends in death. That by separating ourselves from life, it's the death penalty, which I think makes sense. If I separate myself from life, death. If I separate myself from light, I get the dark penalty. It's just how this system works. Now, with these 3 redemption statuses, how could we have possibly restored ourselves? How could we redeem ourselves from this life and status of death? Well, we could have someone else bail us out, someone who would be perfect for us, and then say, okay, I can lay my life down for him, but wait, there is none righteous, no, not one, that's out. I could work off my service, but obviously that's not going to happen because an eternity set and eternity past, I would never escape. And in noting that I would be separated from God forever in a choice that I willingly made, and not only compounding onto this reality, but that in one sin I am choosing to walk away, and God respecting that decision naturally can't uninvoke perfect justice. Which goes to the third one, is that the year of Jubilee was, for all intents and purposes, by God telling the government to forgive all debts. That anyone who owed anyone anything would be forgiven. Because God said so. Because God did something for us. And in noting that to be forgiven your debt by the one you owe it to. Who was the one that we owed our lives to when we willingly rejected him? It was God. So if God forgave us, we're redeemed. I wonder what that's referencing to. John 15:15. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends. For all things I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. Our relationship with God, which was once as owing him a debt, he has now redeemed us. And in noting the relationship we have with Jesus is not employment, but adoption. And in noting that in the episode, Spike had a dragon code, which is where this was all based from. That his policy was essentially, whatever you give me, whatever you save me from, provide me for, or give me a reason to continue on, I am now indebted to you to return. And Applejack saving Spike's life, Spike placed his life in Applejack's hooves. But in John 8:34, Jesus said, he who obeys sin is a slave to sin. So here's the interesting thing. If we, in and of ourselves, have obeyed sin in any single way, we now owe our allegiance to that, which I think makes sense. If you do what someone tells you to, you are obeying them. You are serving them. You are a slave to them. Now, status of slavery, it naturally all depends on whether or not you have a good master who's willing to obey the law, because a lot of people are given cars, and not a lot of people follow the rules. And just noting this, the streets aren't the problem, the drivers are. The cars aren't the weapons. The guns aren't the killers. The psychopath pulling the trigger is. And in noting all of this, Spike's Dragon Code was all centered around what he had lost, what he had owed, what he had gained. Everything that he said, he's just, I'm now indebted to you. And he wasn't exactly that much of a help, because he wasn't intended to serve in that kind of environment. But in noting that Applejack even was desiring to redeem him and give him the opportunity to redeem, quote-unquote, himself, in the end, it didn't come down to that, did it? It came down to Twilight making the effort to intercede and put them in a situation where he would be called to take his life back. But even more importantly than that it's not a matter of what you do, it's what's been done. That this law of slavery and us owing sin our allegiance because of our nature of being inclined to it, God willingly took on himself. He paid our debt for us. So not only someone who loved us, someone who is a close kin to us, someone who became a part of us, then paid our debts for us, but even more so than that, what did he do? He said, the penalty's on me. I've forgiven you by paying with my son's life. 2 out of the 3 accomplished in 1. God obeyed his own law and followed his own rules down to the T. And in noting that he loved you enough to not only love you, but suffer with you, die for you, and buy you back, like the story of the gingerbread man. Girl made a gingerbread man, and he ran off, and he said, run, run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm a gingerbread man. And of course she couldn't. She couldn't control what her gingerbread man was doing. And then finally, having escaped from her, she went home crying. And one day crossed a bakery and saw her gingerbread man in the wall. No, it was still her gingerbread man, but the baker had picked it up. And she went in and said, I'd like my gingerbread man. And the baker said, it'll cost you 10 cents. And she said, no, you don't understand. He's mine. I made him. And the baker said, I'm sorry. It'll cost you 10 cents. He came to me. I now own him. And if you want him, you have to buy him. So she emptied out her piggy bank and came back and took him home with her. and said, now you're really mine, because not only did I make you, but I bought you. Now you're really mine. And that's what we see so beautifully illustrated in the life of a slave, and that we are the slaves, that we're not only runaways from a home that took care of us, but we're bought back to the Father's loving arms and then adopted as children again. That Spike's ultimate calling wasn't to be for Applejack, it was to be for Twilight, and that Twilight actively sought him out when he was making steps that weren't even his, because he ended up really just selling himself. Applejack just said, it's no problem. He said, no, I have to follow my rules. So Applejack respected the rules, but also made an effort to make around the details. The same thing is true for God. He couldn't be unfair. He has to be perfectly just. He has to punish sin, but he loved you too much to let you go on your own. And that's how great a God we serve, that was not only willing to make us, but also to buy us. And to note that, in understanding what slavery means in Scripture, it's not the fact of how we should be treating people. It's to know it's who we were, and it's what God has redeemed us from. Know how much you're forgiven. Know how much you're loved. And that'll give you the ability to love accordingly. Thank you for your time and listening to this study. I hope it's been a blessing to you as much as it has been to me. And if you want to support this ministry, leave a like and subscribe. It's a great encouragement. If you have questions or would like to know more concerning the topic, maybe bond slaves or the Year of Jubilee, if you want further details and insights into what may concern you about the book of Leviticus, I am more than happy to discuss them if they are sincere. But more than anything else, if you want to help the gospel go out to our fan base, please share this video with anyone you feel would be blessed by it. Thank you for your time, and God bless you.